And instead, I'm going to place a waypoint. So when I place one of these, it's a little bit different in the sense that um, instead of just all these transform things, you have more options below.
Mhm.
And this is really what defines a waypoint and what makes it cool. First and foremost, you have the option to make it a spawn point. So
Right.
if you want this to be something that when somebody joins your hubs room, they just are in that spot. That's how you do it. And most of the time, you will probably use that feature, especially if you've deleted all your spawn points and you need a way to get in. By the way,
Yeah, I mean,
if
if
you
you
don't
just
have
create a
any, what happens? Do you know?
if you don't have any, you probably spawn at the origin, but I'm not even sure.
I
I
think
mean,
you're
like
right.
all the default scenes we create, the project templates we have some sort of spawn point in them. And if you create a waypoint and don't check any of those boxes, you basically have it's just a named anchor in space, and there's you're not gonna be able to click on it. You won't automatically spawn at it, but
It's
it will have a
useless,
name, and
pretty much.
it'll have a name so you can link to it, which
Oh,
can be useful.
that's
Um,
true.
but so the default configuration of a waypoint might be kind of confusing to people, but yeah, so you're probably going to want to check at least some of these boxes.
And
So
one
we can
thing,
kind of go through them.
yeah, and if you roll over your mouse on these little question marks, it'll explain what they do.
Hmm.
One thing I will point out, though, especially as we get into the sort of like naming, like where do you want somebody to spawn from the specific URL, is naming these waypoints becomes very important because that's
Hmm.
how it's going to get the name. And it also becomes important if you are trying to make a spawnable spot that you don't want people to get to except for you or like a performer or something. You might want to choose a name that's like a little harder to guess
Hmm.
than just like waypoint number 8 or something, or whatever.
Yeah, and I wouldn't use these for anything like super secure or anything.
Nope.
Then the name is going to be something you can download the GLTF file and find. But I think it will be useful for keeping honest people honest,
Yeah.
sort of thing.
And so I'll leave it just as waypoint for now, but so we've
Hmm.
covered that, whether it's a spawn point. There is the next one called can be occupied, and that one explains here after each use, in other words, each time somebody clicks on it or spawns into it, the waypoint will be disabled until the previous user moves away from it. So I don't know
Right.
exactly how far they have to move. It's probably some hard coded number, but
Yeah, I don't remember the exact distance, but yeah, like the basic point of that is so that um, you can do this for spawn points, but you can also just do it for regular waypoints. Like if someone has clicked on that waypoint and they're in it, then that waypoint won't be clickable by other people, or if it's a spawn point, it won't be used for spawning. Like right now, if you just create spawn point like that, that will be available regardless if people have already spawned in it. Like so, as the scene is configured right now, everyone's just going to spawn in that one spot, and even if you had two of these um, you would have people overlapping because you didn't make it occupiable. So if you want specifically people not to spawn on top of each other, you would create a waypoint with spawnable and occupiable, which means like okay, once someone has spawned in this location, it's going to be taken until they move away.
exactly. And because it's occupied, if somebody else tried to spawn in and there was nowhere else to spawn, it would probably put them at the origin,
I think that's right.
or again, next available one. So beyond that, this is where it starts getting interesting. The one called clickable, and I think people miss this one a lot because they don't quite understand what they're for.
Hmm.
Um, these do not have to be spawn points. In other
Right.
words, these actually will live in your hub's scene, and you can see them when you hold down the space bar or your like your A button on your Oculus controller or something.
Hmm.
They show up as a little icon. I'll get to that in a minute. And then you can actually click your mouse on them or your cursor on them, and you will essentially teleport to that spot.
Yep.
And so, in order to do that, it has to be marked as clickable. If it's not, it
If it's not, it won't show up there
yeah, it
basically.
just won't show up like that. And then as we move down the list here, disable motion. This can be used with or without clickable. Like it could be used as a spawn point. Like
Hmm.
in the case, for example, you had a classroom setting with a bunch of middle schoolers or something, and you were like, well, I want them to spawn in a specific seat, and I
And
do
not be able to
not want them
move.
to get out of their
Yeah.
seat and
Yep.
start flying around and doing weird things. And the same would go for a seat, like around a conference table or something. You could let somebody click on it, say, and then once they're in that seat, they can't accidentally or on purpose move out of that seat. I actually like disable motion because um, in the case where maybe you have a new user who is
Yeah,
not
yeah, it can be
comfortable.
useful for certain kinds of uses. Like if you want to create a scene that, yeah, like where everyone is just gonna kind of be facing at each other at a table or sitting in a seat watching a presenter or something like that. Yeah, it just gives less people options to accidentally look the wrong way or do something they didn't intend to do.
Accidentally
Um,
teleport into someone's lap
mhm.
or something. That which is actually the next one, disable teleporting.
Right.
When it, I should specify when I say disable motion, that means like left stick motion or
WASD arrow keys.
WASD.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and so one nice kind of configuration you can do is you make it clickable, occupiable, and disable motion, but allow teleporting. That's a nice way to make a seat, for example. So you can click on it. That'll put you into the chair or whatever. You'll be there, and you won't be able to like arrow keys around, but you'll be able to teleport to get back out. To walk around again or to switch to another seat.
And that's a
Um,
little more purposeful. So
mhm.
I think what I've found is that um, if you don't have disable motion on, people will often accidentally move out of the seat, usually because they were like trying to type in the text field or
Yeah, or just
something, and
fidgeting or
just
whatever. But yeah,
yeah.
like the kind of making a seat by using disable motion and occupiable and clickable is a nice little recipe for waypoints.
So we've covered disabled teleporting, and then the next one is snap to floor plan, and this one, as it describes here, avatars will move as close as they can to this waypoint, but will not leave the ground. In other words, you can put one of these up in the air. Let's say
Mhm.
you wanted a this new mouse has a really spinny wheel. If you move this up in the air, you could allow someone to spawn in up in the air and be locked in place, and all the other things we just talked about. Um, but you may actually not want that. You may want them to like get close to it, but then actually snap down onto like the closest spot on the floor underneath.
Mhm.
We talked about floor plan last week. I'm not going to get all into that, but was that last week or
Yeah,
the
and
week before?
without I forget, I think that was
2 weeks
two
ago. I
weeks
don't
ago.
know.
Uh, um, with that one, so like if you don't snap to the floor plan, and you go to a waypoint that's not on the ground, you'll actually switch into flying mode temporarily. We have this slash fly, or you can hit the G key to fly around. If you teleport to a waypoint that's in the sky and does not have snap to floor plan on, you'll be flying until you touch the ground again, and then you'll automatically switch back out of flying mode. Um, but that's like a nice way to, you can create like an overlook area or something like that to look down on a scene. And especially if you use disable motion or something like that, you can have them kind of go up there and look around, and then they can teleport back down to get out of it. Or um, yeah, like these are pretty. The waypoints are pretty like generic. They have lots of little different options, and by kind of combining the different sets of options, you can get lots of different functionality out of them, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I like that we kept it granular enough that you could
Hmm.
sort of invent your own
Yeah,
usage.
it makes it kind of confusing to use at first because it's not just like, okay, I want a
A seat.
spawn point or I want a seat or what. Yeah, but by allowing all these different options, we get all those things with one tool, which is really nice. Because once you learn this, you'll be able to do lots of different things.
Similarly, like as far as like a spawn point being up in the air, you may actually want it somewhat in the ground. Like you may want somebody to spawn so their head is
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
very low to the ground, and you don't want them to automatically snap up onto this. So
Right.
you would leave that off for this sort of a scenario where you wanted it low down. Um, the very last feature is called maintain initial orientation, and you could think of it this way: if this is a clickable waypoint, and I'm over here, and I see the little icon pop up, and I click on it, do you want me to teleport into it and then face that direction, or do you want me to just keep facing the way I was facing?
Hmm.
It may be a little weird to think about, well, why would I ever want it to not face? Well, an example might be you have a waypoint that's just used as a shortcut to somewhere,
Exactly.
take me to the top of those stairs or take me to the bottom of those stairs or something. Um, you wouldn't necessarily want the avatar to turn around and get
Right.
sort of
You don't particularly care which
disoriented.
direction it's facing. You just kind of want to move them, not rotate them.
Exactly.
Um, and and so you know you but you might want the opposite also. Like you might want a thing that's overlooking and looking at a very particular spot. It's like, okay, I want them to, be viewing this scene from this angle at this spot. Then you can leave that unchecked, and then it'll face them specifically the way the spawn point is facing, or the
Right.
waypoint is facing.
Now, it is worth noting that when we talk about orientation on a waypoint, the way that we've designed this right now, the only orientation that matters is rotating on this axis.
Mm-hmm.
We do not support putting a user like at an angle like that. They'll
Yep.
just keep facing with their head upright.
Yeah, and the reason we've done that is just it's mostly like a usability sort of issue. Like we don't,
We don't want you
because
to
then,
accidentally do this and then people spawn in and they're like all like
well, and then how do they move after that? Because right now all the movement controls kind of assume that you're flat on the ground and you can't roll because there's no way for them to roll themselves back. So you'd have to teleport to another waypoint. So we just decided to just not allow that for right now. But it's possible we'll allow that in the fufuture
I could see
in some
having another
form.
flag that said like allow, you know,
Yeah, roll
weird
and pitch.
angles. I don't know, whatever you want to call it. Because it would kind of be cool if I could like spawn onto a wall or upside down or something
Right.
like
It's
that.
just
But
right now we have no way to like walk on the wall, for example. We don't have multiple floor plans that you could have in different orientations and that sort of
right,
stuff. So it was just easier just
didn't
to not.
didn't make a lot of sense.
But we do want
Um,
you to be able to point them in some direction that way. So
Now, the one thing that is kind of a delightful surprise to a lot of people is even though we don't support like weird angles like that, what we do support is scale. So if you were to take your waypoint and use like these scale values and just blow it up real big like that, when you click on this waypoint or spawn into this waypoint, your avatar will actually be this big.
mhm.
Or likewise, you could put somebody in a situation where they're like super small, like maybe you want them to be like a mouse uh, on the conference table while everyone else is sitting around it or something. Your mileage may vary on this.
Yeah.
One thing I want to point out is that even though this does work and it's supported, there are a few bugs. I'll say it that way. There's a few
Yeah, I
bugs
mean,
with like
in
how it
general,
behaves, but
with scaling your avatar in general, like whether it's through this or with the grow and shrink commands, um, it's there's some bugs with graphical bugs, like the render distance ends up changing, because we end up scaling your camera too, so you'll get some weird artifacts. I mean, it can be fun to do, but I just be aware that it's kind of a little iffy.
I'll say it's
The other
supported, but not necessarily 100%.
recommended.
Yeah.
But I think it can be really fun for certain scenes. And like what one thing to keep in mind too is like they need a way to get back to their original size, probably, if you want that. So, either making another waypoint, or they could use the shrink command to get back down. What one nice kind of recipe for if you want to do that like big, have them blow up big, is to disable motion, make it occupiable, disable motion, and even disable teleporting, um, and then make another waypoint for them to teleport to get out of it, basically. So
So
so they'll get
if
big.
this was a big one, you might make sure that wherever the person is looking, for example, that they can easily
See
see
the other
this
waypoint
this
exactly,
one
but
to get back, right?
right,
And
but then you disable movement and teleporting on the big one and make it occupiable and clickable. Um, and then you can basically click on that. You get big. You can look around, but you can't move out of it by teleporting or moving. But you're kind of forced to, if you want to get small again, to click back on that waypoint. And that's kind of a cool recipe for doing that sort of thing. Like if you wanted to do, like you said, the thing on the conference table where you want to get small on the conference table in a snow globe or something, you can make that and then have a thing that lets them teleport back out to one of the chairs around the conference table. That's kind of a cool way to do that with minimal issues.